You're the next one, man.
The Final Destination horror franchise from the early 2000s was a commercially successful series of 5 films, all based around pretty much the same premise. Somebody at the beginning sees premonitions of death. They convince people not to do certain things and thus save their lives. But death still has these people marked and comes back for them in gruesome and bloody ways. The first 2 movies are brilliant. In fact, the second film, the scene at the beginning on the road with the logging truck, that's so iconic. Anytime I've ever seen a truck like that, I've literally been scared and avoided it. However, despite being commercially successful, I felt that films 3, 4, and 5 were pretty weak. At that point, we'd just seen this story so many times before, and it didn't feel original. However, you know Hollywood, they love their sequels. And let's be honest, the horror genre, it's probably the most sequel-heavy genre in all of film. Now, this past weekend, 14 years after the last film, the new film, Final Destination Bloodlines, dropped into theaters. So what do we have here? Is this like the first 2 films? Not just, commercially successful, but pretty praised critically as well? Or is this, like the last 3, simple cash grabs, films that you see, and then 2 months later, if you try to think about it, you don't remember anything about the plot? Well, before we answer that, let's talk a little bit about the plot for the film Final Destination Bloodlines.
Let's talk.
Stephanie Reyes is a college student who has recurring nightmares of a tower collapsing in the 60s. She discovers that these nightmares are a premonition she inherited from her grandmother. The grandmother predicted the collapse of the building and saved a group of people from death. Decades later, however, the granddaughter, Stephanie, begins to have the visions herself and visions of her family members dying. She realizes that there is a sequence and must fight to prevent death from reclaiming her family's bloodline. So what works in this film? Well, sticking to true Final Destination movies, the opening sequence it's incredible. It's so well done. In fact, I think next to the initial sequence in the second movie, the one I mentioned earlier with the car accident and the truck, this scene might be the best one of the series. It's very tense, it's well shot, you feel the tension growing and growing and growing throughout the entire scene, and the deaths here are pretty gruesome. Following this familiar pattern, there are other great death scenes in this too. I won't spoil it, but check out the MRI scene and the grandmother's cabin scene. Finally, I think overall some of the deaths here are the most clever of the franchise, in that it takes a series of events for them to happen, but they all seem very plausible and believable, and you may actually be walking across the street with a little bit more care after seeing them.
It's pretty gory.
What doesn't work here, however, is that while it is at times clever, and some of the kills were clever and well done, this isn't exactly original territory. We've seen this before. If you've seen these movies, you've seen all of this before. You know exactly where it's heading and what's about to happen, so there's no points for originality in this one. Also, while it doesn't rely on a ton of CG, the CG that it does have in a couple of the kill scenes is pretty low budget stuff. Finally, in typical horror movie fashion, you have a lot of unknown performers, and while none are particularly bad, no performance really stands out. Look, if you like the first 5 movies in this franchise, you're probably going to like this one. I wouldn't say it's as good as the first 2, but it's probably better than the 3rd, 4th, and 5th installment. It's a solid but unoriginal and unspectacular addition to this franchise. I don't think it's going to be a movie that stays with you very long, but it's definitely worth seeing if you're into blood and gore and the Final Destination franchise overall. All in all, a solid but unspectacular film.
It's fine, I guess.
Well, that's all I have for you this week. Tune in next week where I give you my thoughts and feelings on whatever I've seen. In the meantime, click that like button, subscribe, Leave a question or a comment. Share this video with friends and enemies alike. And as always, thank you for giving me your valuable time, and I'll see you next week. Take care.